Let's look at the questions and solutions of a passage from CAT 2024 Slot 3. In an earlier video, I had discussed how to read the passage, how to make sense of the passage. In this video, we're going to be looking at the questions and figuring out which are easy, which are tough, and how to reason out which options are right and which options are wrong. So starting with question number one. One says the author believes that a liberal arts education combined with participation and language preservation empowers students in all of the following ways except. So which of these is not something that a student with liberal arts degree will get empowered to do? And this is a pretty simple question, provided you go back to the passage. Going back to the passage to solve questions is very, very important. And if we look at options A, B, and D, all of these have been said that they develop a better understanding of their own culture because they appreciate the culture for their own biases and then understand that what all blind spots they had when they start looking at languages from other cultures' perspectives. They learn different languages, absolutely. That's been talked about in the passage, that language is taught in a liberal arts degree, and when they learn languages of other cultures, that's what leads to a diverse perspective. And they overcome cultural barriers to communication. That's what the author is talking about when he mentions a global citizen. When a person becomes a global citizen, they understand the perspective of other languages. Establishing schools, though, to preserve languages spiraling towards extinction. This has been mentioned in the last paragraph, but not with respect to people who have pursued liberal arts degrees. Because we go back to the passage, and if you read it here, the second sentence says, for example, Navajo, Cree, and Inuit communities have established schools. So the communities of these cultures have established schools, not students who had been trained in liberal arts from a different country. No, the native communities themselves have established schools for these languages, where the primary mode of instruction is done in these languages themselves. That's why C is not given inside the passage as something that students from a liberal arts background can do. A, B, and D have been mentioned in the previous couple of paragraphs, in the second to last and third to last paragraphs. So A, B, and D are not the correct answers. So simple question, provided you go back to the passage. Question number 2 says it can be inferred from the passage that it is likely South America had a slightly better language survival rate than North America for all of the following reasons except. The key word in this question, which should be made a note of before you go back to the passage, is the word likely. That should tell us that the reason why South American languages had a slightly better survival rate is not given in the passage. We have to figure out the likely reason why they did survive as compared to languages in North America, and which of these is not one of the reasons. So I have to go to the passage, use the information given inside the passage to infer something beyond the passage, because I can only find out that what can be the likely reason or what is not the likely reason specifically to solve this question. That makes this question moderately difficult because the answer is not directly present in the passage. But if I go back to the passage, in the very first paragraph, the author talks about reasons why North American languages went extinct so much. So first was, of course, death and destruction to many North American communities, Native American communities. So killing them, outright killing them, has led to dying out of these languages. And then this was followed by US federal policies restricting the use of indigenous languages. So the government said that you cannot use those languages, you have to use our language, including the removal of native children from their communities to federal boarding schools. So they were removed from the native communities, sent to federal boarding schools where the native languages and cultural practices of their communities was prohibited. So three reasons have been given. One, their languages were restricted, prohibited. Their children were removed from the communities. As those communities, people were directly killed. So whichever option is not talking about one of these three will be the correct answer. So when I look at the options from these perspectives, then I realize that answer should be option D, because locals being provided jobs in colonial administration is not being mentioned as a reason for North American languages going extinct. Whereas A talks about removing of children, B talks about killing of people, C talks about colonial government was unable to mainstream the locals. So mainstream the locals means bring the locals to speak the mainstream language, which in this case, of course, was English or Spanish. So A, B, and C are given in that paragraph. D is not. Nothing about jobs is being mentioned, and that's why D is likely the correct answer. That maybe in South America, had A, B, and C happened, whatever is written in A, B, and C, had that happened, then their languages would have had a greater chance of survival. Whereas D is not a reason for languages going extinct. So even if D happened, it's not going to lead to a greater chance of survival as compared to North American languages. That's why D is the correct answer. Not an easy question, moderate level difficulty, I would say. I would even go as far as saying moderate to tough for a lot of students. Moving to question 3. 3 says to try the following hypothetical situations, if true, would most strongly undermine the central ideas of the passage. See, we need to understand what is the central idea of the passage. Central idea of the passage is for the author to tell us that we should preserve languages. For that, we need to teach people liberal arts, and we need to work towards preservation of languages because it's going to add a lot of value. So whichever option is going to undermine this, is going to say that no, it doesn't add any value in attempts to preserve languages, in teaching people liberal arts, and there is no value in preserving languages, then those options will undermine the central ideas of the passage. So understanding the question itself will take a bit of time if we don't understand primarily why the author has written the passage. That in itself makes it a moderate level difficulty question. But if you understand the question, after that, figuring out which options are wrong, which option is right, kind of becomes easy. Let's start with option D, the last option. Last option says most liberal arts students will pursue jobs in publishing and human resource management rather than doctorates in linguistics. This the author has admitted to. In the passage, the author directly states that rarely do liberal arts students take up professions in linguistics. Some of them do. But even if they don't, there is still benefits of getting a liberal arts degree. It's what the author is arguing for in the second to last paragraph. So D is absolutely true. It's not a hypothetical situation. It is happening. And despite that, the author's argument, the author's perspective holds true. So D is not the correct answer. C says, recording a dying language that has only a few remaining speakers freezes it in time. It stops evolving further. Even if this is true, it is still leading to preservation of language. It is stopping a language from dying out, which is what the author is saying is a good thing. So if it is still surviving, it doesn't matter whether it evolves or not. As long as it is surviving, it's fine. So C also doesn't undermine the central idea of the passage, because the author is not talking about language evolution at all. B says, schools that teach endangered language can preserve the language only for a generation. Even if it survives for one generation, it is still a bit of a positive. But B can be a bit confusing because if it is survived for only one generation, what is the use of such schools? Can be argued for. But if I read A says a liberal arts education requires that in addition to being fluent in English, students gain fluency in 2 of the top 5 most spoken languages globally. So then the author's entire point of when you learn new languages, you understand new cultures and their perspectives, all of that is going to be proven wrong because of endangered languages are not being taught. If students are not getting perspectives of these almost dying out languages, then how will they work towards survival of languages? Then the entire point made in the second to last and the third to last paragraphs falls flat. And that's why A is most undermining and B is not. Again, not an easy question. Moderate to tough question is what question number 3 is. And last question says, in the context of the passage, which are the following hypothetical situations, hypothetical scenarios. If true is not an example, this not, thankfully, they have made it all caps. If true is not an example of the kind of loss that occurs when a language becomes extinct. So they are talking about extinction of language and what kind of loss accompanies it. So if we keep in mind the question again, reading the question is very important, that this is talking about a language becoming extinct. So any option that talks about impact on that said language will be true or will definitely signify a loss that occurs. Any option that does not talk about language is going to be the correct answer because that is not an example of the kind of loss that occurs when a language becomes extinct. And if we keep that in mind, only B is the correct answer. Because B talks about the fact that one of the indigenous tribal groups will be removed from the government list. So it is not talking about impact of language, impact on the language of those native speakers. Whereas A talks about the fact that they had 35 different words for snow. When this language becomes extinct, we will lose that understanding of nature because of loss of language. So A is talking about loss of language. C is talking about Andamanese language as a word to describe someone who has lost a stepsister. That word we will lose, that's loss of language. D is talking about Nicobarese language, describes 20 different moods of the ocean. By the time the last speaker is educated in Central Board School, they would have forgotten this language. So we will not be able to characterize moods of oceans in that particular language. So D is not the correct answer. So this is an easy question as well. In my opinion, someone who is seriously preparing for the CAT examination should get question number 1 and 4 correct. 2 and 3, I can understand people finding them a bit difficult. So I would say 2 out of 4 is a good percentage accuracy as far as this particular reading comprehension exercise in the CAT paper is concerned. This exercise is a prime example of how sometimes passages can be relatively simple to read in terms of language, in terms of even content, the way that the author has communicated their points. Even the points are quite a lot, but it is still easy to follow. Despite that, exercises need not be simple. I've come across so many students telling me that they decide to select the passage based on the first two lines, that if the lines are talking about topics that they are not familiar with, then they leave the passages. Passages which are easy to read, they solve those passages. That approach does not work, and this is a prime example of why. Because this passage, you might find it very simple to read in the first few paragraphs. You might end up attempting this particular RC exercise, but then while solving the questions, you will realize that the questions are not that easy. Options are not that easily eliminatable. Going back to the passage, searching for the answer sometimes will not yield the correct answer directly. So keeping this in mind, remember that don't judge a book by its cover. Don't judge an RC exercise by the passage. Try to attempt all the passages, irrespective of how difficult the passage is to read. The questions and the options are the ones which determine how tough an exercise is, and how much time and how much effort will it take for you to solve, and what kind of scores you can expect from that exercise. Thank you.